In a world where machines have quietly infiltrated our classrooms, where original human thought has been synthesized, and the line between student and software has vanished, one teacher stands between order and total chaos. Armed with a half-charged laptop, a lukewarm cup of coffee, and a suspicious gut feeling.
Yeah, that's exactly how it feels when you're grading at like 11 at night and a kid who usually writes in sentence fragments suddenly turns in a flawless paragraph about the intricate socio-political paradigms of thermal equilibrium. But you don't need to be John Connor. You don't need to wage war against the machines. You need a calm classroom routine for what to do next. Let's get into it. I'm Peter Weise, and this is Science Wise, a practical podcast for secondary teachers trying to make assessment, learning, and technology fit real classrooms. Today, we're talking about suspected AI misuse. Not how to become the AI police. Not how to prove every sentence was typed by a human. And definitely not how to turn grading into a deleted scene from a sci-fi courtroom drama. Today is about what to do when something feels off and you need a response that is calm, fair, and focused on learning. Okay, so here's the thing. Suspicion is not nothing, but suspicion is also not proof. The mistake people make is jumping straight from, this feels weird, to, this student cheated. There are a few steps missing in the middle, and that middle is where good teaching has to happen. So let's turn down the dramatic soundtrack, because in a movie, the hero has to expose the machine, save humanity, and maybe leap dramatically away from an explosion. In a classroom, the teacher has a different job. The teacher has to verify the learning. And that's a smaller sentence, but it's a much bigger job description. The question is not, can I prove AI wrote this? The better question is, can this student show the thinking behind this work? That shift matters because the final product might be the trailer. It might be polished. It might have the best music. It might have the perfect dramatic voiceover. But the learning is the movie. And what we need to know is whether there's actually a movie there, not just a trailer. So today's routine has 4 moves. First, treat alarms as alarms, not verdicts. Next, use a calm conference. Then, ask for the scene behind the trailer. And finally, build a recovery path before you need it. That's the routine. Signal, conversation, evidence, recovery path. So our first move, treat alarms as alarms, not verdicts. A sudden style shift is a signal. A detector score is a signal. A weird citation is a signal. Missing notes, missing draft, missing data, or a final answer that has no visible process. Those are all signals. But a signal is not the villain reveal. It's not the moment where the camera zooms in and the music goes dun dun dun. It just means check closer. Think of it like a fire alarm. A fire alarm is not a fire. It might be smoke, it might be steam, it might be burnt popcorn, it might be a middle schooler making a choice that will soon involve an assistant principal. But you still respond. You don't ignore it. You also don't run into the hall yelling, I know exactly who did this. You check. You follow the process. Suspicious student work is the same. Maybe the student used AI in a way that violated the assignment. Maybe they used Grammarly too aggressively. Maybe a parent helped too much. Maybe a tutor rewrote half of it. Maybe the student really did the right thing and they just had one of those magical nights where the writing finally clicked. That can happen. Not often at 11:58 p.m., but it can happen. So the first move is to name the signal privately to yourself, then compare it to the evidence you already have. Does this match the student's in-class writing? Does it match the notes? Does it match the draft? Does it match the lab data? Does it match how the student explained things out loud? Does it match the process you ask students to use? If the answer is no, you don't have proof yet, but you do have a reason to have a short private conversation. And here are lines you can actually say. This part doesn't match what I've seen from you before. I want to understand your process. I'm not using this one signal as proof. Help me connect this final answer to your notes, draft, or classwork. Notice the tone. Not dramatic, not sarcastic, not, really, you expected me to believe this, even if your inside voice is absolutely saying that. The student's job in this moment is to explain the process, show notes or drafts or sources or calculations, and clarify what help they used. Your job is to listen for ownership. Can the student explain the idea in plain language? Can they connect the product to the process? Can they answer a related follow-up question? If they can, you have useful evidence. If they cannot, you also have useful evidence. That's why this works. If this goes sideways and the student gets defensive, keep the sentence simple. I'm not deciding everything right now. I'm checking what evidence of learning we have. That line can save you because it keeps the conversation from becoming a trial. The second move, use the calm conference. The calm conference is not the interrogation scene. No swinging lamp over the table. No, we know what you did. No dramatic folder slap. It's the part where we stop the movie and go back to teaching. The conference should be private. It should be short. It should start with curiosity, and it should ask the student to show the learning. Here's a 6-sentence script. Sentence 1. I want to talk about this assignment because parts of it don't match the work I've seen from you before. Sentence 2. I'm not starting with an accusation, but I need to understand your process. Sentence 3. So walk me through how you created this section. Sentence 4. Show me where this idea came from your notes, sources, draft, or your classwork. Sentence 5. I'm going to ask you to explain one part in your own words and then apply the same idea to a new example. Sentence 6. If the learning is there, great. If not, we're going to make a plan for you to show the learning evidence honestly. That's it. The script is doing a lot of work. It names the concern, it avoids accusation, it asks for process, it asks for evidence, it includes a transfer check, and it gives students a way back to learning. And that last part matters, because if the only options are you're guilty or never mind, we have set up a bad system. We need a middle. A way to say, right now, I don't have enough evidence that this work shows your understanding, so let's get better evidence. In a high school class, that might sound like, walk me through how you made this claim. What decisions did you make here? What source or data points support this? What would change if this example were different? In middle school, I would make it more concrete. Show me where this idea started. Tell me what this sentence means in your own words. Point to the part that you understand the best. Point to the part that you need help fixing. The student should be doing something active. Explaining, pointing, connecting, solving, rewriting, not just sitting there while we give a speech about academic honesty. And to be clear, academic honesty matters, but a speech is not evidence of learning. A student explaining their reasoning is. Now let's talk about the third move. Ask for the scene behind the trailer, because here's where it can get weird. AI can make the final product look better than the learning underneath of it. Not always, but often enough that we have to change what we check. The surface can be smooth. The sentences can be clean. The transitions can transition. The conclusions can conclude. And still, when you ask the student what the paragraph means, the whole thing starts wobbling like a cart on one bad wheel. That does not automatically mean AI, but it does mean the product alone is not enough. So we ask for the scene work. Explain the ideas in your own words. Show where this came from in your notes. Connect this claim to the source. Connect this conclusion to the data. Connect the answers to the calculations. Apply the same idea to a new example. Identify a limitation, an assumption, or a possible area. That is not a gotcha. That is learning. So let me put that into some classroom language. I'm not asking you to prove that you never touched a tool. I'm asking you to show that the learning is yours. That line is important because sometimes AI was allowed as a coach. Sometimes students were allowed to use feedback. Sometimes they could use a tool for grammar or brainstorming or revision, and sometimes they could not. So the question is not always, was AI involved? The question is, did the student stay within the assignment expectations? And can they show the learning? That's the classroom level move. Tools are secondary. Learning evidence is first. Now, a quick research note, because this is one of those places where it's easy to feel like we need a magic detector. We do not. A lot of teaching centers and academic integrity guidance are saying the same version of this. Automatic AI detection should not be treated as proof by itself. There are sources down in the doobly-doo, but the short version is that detectors can be useful as a signal, but they are not reliable enough to replace teacher judgment, conversation, and actual evidence. So again, we are not ignoring signals. We are refusing to let the signals make the whole decision. A detector score is not a villain reveal. A sudden voice change is not proof. A suspicious gut feeling is not a verdict. The learning check is the move. And our fourth move, build a recovery path before you need it. This is the part that saves your future self. Because the worst time to design a fair response is when you're tired, irritated, and staring at a paragraph that sounds like it was written by a committee of robots wearing carnigans. Future you deserves a plan. The recovery path is the answer to the question, if I don't have enough evidence from the submitted work, how can the student show the learning another way? The answer should be usually short, not a giant punishment assignment, not redo the whole project from scratch by tomorrow, not the sequel with a bigger budget. The redo is one clean scene that shows the learning. That might be a 5-minute oral explanation. It might be an in-class paragraph. It might be a parallel math problem. It might be a new source analysis. It might be a revised claim using class evidence. It might be a short CER based on actual lab data. It might be explain what you changed and why. The key is that the redo should produce fresh evidence. It should usually be shorter than the original assignment. It should happen in a setting where the evidence is more trustworthy, and it should target the learning, not the polish. Here's some teacher lines for that moment. Right now, I don't have enough evidence that this work shows your understanding. I'm going to give you a chance to show the learning another way. This redo is not making it prettier. It's just about making your thinking visible. Then give the student a specific task. Not vague. Don't do better. Something like use your actual data table. Write one claim, one piece of evidence, and one sentence of reasoning. Or save the same type of problem with new numbers and explain why the method works. Or choose one class source, make one claim, and explain one limitation of that source. So if this goes sideways and the student says, so you're saying I cheated, you can bring it back. I'm saying I don't have enough evidence yet. This is your chance to show it. That's a claim. That is fair, and it's also firm, because we're not pretending everything is fine when the evidence is missing. We're just not turning suspicion into a verdict. Okay, brain checkpoint. Why does this work? Because students need enough background knowledge to explain and verify what they submit. If they've outsourced the thinking, the conference reveals the gap. If they did the work honestly, the conference gives them a fair chance to explain. And if they're somewhere in the messy middle, which is where a lot of students live, the conference gives you a way to teach. That's important. A student might not be a villain. They might be overwhelmed. They might not understand the boundary. They might have used a tool as a shortcut because the assignment felt impossible. They might have copied something because the clock was running out. That doesn't make it okay, but it does change the teacher move. The goal is not just compliance. The goal is learning, judgment, and ownership. When the students own the learning, they can usually explain the decisions, even if the final product is messy. When they only own the product, the explanation falls apart pretty quickly. The special effect is not the learning. The student explanation is the learning. So let's make this concrete. Here's another science example. Imagine a lab conclusion comes in beautifully written. The student writes about heat transfer, molecular motion, maybe the intricate relationship between thermal energy and structural transformation. Very impressive. Very trailer. But when you look at the data table, it's incomplete. The units are inconsistent. The graph title is graph. Classic. So the move is not, this is AI. The move is, show me where the data points support this claim, then explain one uncertainty or limitation. If the student cannot connect the claim to the data, the short redo is not the whole new lab report. It's 3 sentences in class. Our claim is, the data that supports it is, one limitation or uncertainty is, then the transfer question. If the oven temperature were higher, but the bake times were shorter, what might change about spread or browning? Now you're checking science thinking. Can the student use actual data? Can they explain the idea in plain language? Can they name the limitation? Can they transfer the concept? That's evidence. The lab report might have special effects. The data connection tells us where there is a story. So let's move on to ELA. A colleague might have a student submit a literary analysis paragraph that suddenly sounds much more polished than the student's in-class writing. The claim is broad, the transitions are smooth, the vocabulary has somehow gone from the character is mad to the protagonist's internal conflict illuminates the fragility of moral certainty. Again, maybe the student wrote it, maybe not. The move is not to make the vocabulary the crime. The move is, I want to understand how you built this paragraph. Show me the annotation that connects this quote to your claim. Then, explain how that quote supports your interpretation. If the student cannot explain the connection, the short check could be, here's a different passage. Write one claim and explain which phrase supports it. That checks the skill, not the font, not the polish, not the cinematic trailer voice. The paragraph looked like the trailer. The annotation shows whether there was a movie behind it. For math, a teacher might see a perfect solution that skips the messy thinking. The student has the answer, the method, and none of the usual human fingerprints. So the teacher asks, explain why this method works, identify where an error could happen, and solve the same type of problem with different numbers. The question is not, who wrote this? The question is, can the student still do the scene when the numbers change? For social studies, a polished but generic argument might need a source check. Which class source supports this claim? What is one limitation of that source? Now apply the same reasoning to a different historical context. The product might sound cinematic, but the source work has to be real. Let me give you another example. This is not one specific student. It's the kind of thing I think a lot of us are seeing in some form. A student submits a history paragraph comparing two revolutions. It's organized, it's confident. It uses phrases like social political transformation and economic disenfranchisement. It has trailer energy, but the teacher notes two problems. First, it does not sound like the student's in-class quick writes. Second, it references a cause that was not in the assigned sources. And so instead of writing AI on the paper or assigning a 0 or ignoring it because the proof feels hard, the teacher says, this paragraph has some ideas that don't match the notes or the sources we use, so I want to understand your process. Which class source helped you make this claim? The student cannot identify the source. Now that matters. The teacher says, okay, let's reset. Choose one class source. Write one claim about the revolution using that source. Then explain one limitation of that source. The student writes a short response. Less polished, less cinematic, but it shows partial understanding. Now the teacher has something real to score and respond to. What changed? The teacher did not need to prove which tool was used. The teacher shifted from product-only grading to verified evidence. The dramatic soundtrack got turned off, and the classroom routine did its job. Now, when does this become formal? This is where we stay in our lane. I'm not writing district policy here. I'm not telling you what your school consequences should be. I'm talking about the classroom step before things escalate. Most cases can start with the classroom conference. Formal steps become more appropriate when the behavior repeats, when the student cannot explain submitted work, when the sources are fabricated, when the expectations were clear, when documentation exists, when the response follows your school's actual process consistently. Keyword there is consistently, not based on which student it is, not based on how tired we are, not based on how much the writing annoyed us, and definitely not based on one detector source. This is not the final battle scene. This is the part where we follow the actual process. So, some common pitfalls. Our first one, public confrontation. Don't call the student out in front of the class. Even if you are right, that's a bad move. It damages trust and it turns the issue into shame instead of evidence. The second pitfall, saying this is obviously AI. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. But once you say that, the conversation becomes about your accusation instead of the student's learning. The third one is letting the detector score make the decision. Again, detector scores can be signals. They are not the whole case. Our fourth one, ignoring suspicious work because proof feels hard. That one's tempting. I get it. You're tired. You have 94 other things to grade. The copier's jammed. The email you should not have opened is now living in your brain rent-free. But ignoring it teaches a lesson too. It teaches students that the final product matters more than the learning. Our fifth pitfall, making the redo bigger than the original task. That turns recovery into punishment. The redo should be short, focused, and tied to the learning target. And the last pitfall is treating polished writing as the problem. Polish is not the problem. Missing evidence is the problem. That's the distinction. Overreaction damages trust. Underreaction damages the value of the work. The middle path is calm, repeatable process. Don't let the soundtrack choose your response. So here's your try it this week. Write your 6-sentence suspected misuse conference script before you need it. This should probably take about 10 minutes. Save it in a document, put it in your planner, tape it inside a cabinet door if that's your system. No judgment. Teachers have weird systems because schools are weird places. Here's what success looks like. The next time something feels off, you do not improvise from frustration. You do not start with a detector. You do not start with an accusation. Use a private, calm process. Signal, conversation, evidence, recovery path, documentation if needed. That's the routine. And I will say this script one more time because this is the part worth stealing. I want to talk to you about this assignment because parts of it don't match the work I've seen from you before. I'm not starting with an accusation, but I do need to understand your process. Walk me through how you created this section. Show me where this idea came from in your notes, sources, draft, or your classwork. I'm going to ask you to explain one part of your own words and then apply the same idea to a new example. If there's learning there, great. If not, we're going to make a plan for you to show that learning evidence honestly. That is usable tomorrow. You can change the words so it sounds like you, but keep the structure. Notice, don't accuse, ask for process, ask for evidence, check transfer, create a recovery path. You don't need to fight the machines. You don't need to prove every keystroke. You need a routine that protects learning. Calm, consistent, private, focused on evidence. That's the move. And if you have a real classroom question about how this works in your content area, send it my way. The best version of this series is not me talking in general. It's us taking real classroom problems and turning them into routines teachers can actually use. Thanks for listening to Science Wise.